The sweet spot for an eating window is 10 hours. This will lower blood pressure, reverse type 2 diabetes, and it's easy to sustain. Dr. Panda with Dr. Scher, the DietDoctor.com.
Most humans who do time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, sometimes they push it to too much, too extreme, and they may be reducing their caloric intake or they may be reducing their protein intake. And one thing I must emphasize again and again is in all our mouse studies, we make sure that the mice eat the same number of calories from the same food as the ad libitum or any time eating mice. So we are not reducing calories, we are not reducing any protein component or anything. And this is a huge difference between human studies and mouse because many people inadvertently reduce their food intake. But there are other studies. For example, there are studies, well-controlled studies done on resistance trained athletes who did time restricted eating. The muscle mass remained constant. They slightly reduce their fat mass, and that's a very good example because these people are very mindful. Resistance training athletes, they're very mindful of their food. They have tried their best to reduce their fat mass and build up their muscle mass. And when they did this time restricted eating, they didn't change too much of their nutrition quality, but still it helped them to reduce their fat mass and preserve muscle mass. Many people think fasting is a painful experience that can reduce nutrition intake. So that's why we created this app, My Circadian Clock. People can self-monitor themselves for a couple of weeks by not changing their eating habit. Just see when you eat and how much you eat. And if that is 16 hours, then even if you reduce that window by 4 hours and come to 12 hours, that's a very good starting point. Where are you right now? And if you're above, say, 14 hours, then try to bring it down to 12 hours. Try for a couple of weeks. And then you see, can you bring it down to 10 hours? Even if you can bring it down to 10 hours for 5 days, that's pretty good. Because once you can bring it down to 10 hours for 5 days, then your body actually trains itself. You don't have to tell your body. In the weekend, you'll notice that if you eat outside this 10-hour window late into the night, then next day your body will revolt. You'll have food hangover, as if your stomach forgot to digest your food, is punishing you. Then you'll come back to that 10 hours window. If we start, say, around breaking our fast 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, then your last meal should be 5 or 6 in the evening. And then that's doable for most people because you can still have one meal with your loved one. If you bring it down to 8 hours or 6 hours, then it can put some stress on social connection and other stuff. And then if you can do at 10 hours time restricted eating for at least 5 to 6 days, then that's pretty good enough because though in those 10 hours, what we're finding is many people who have high blood pressure, they reduce their blood pressure as if they're taking a blood pressure medication. The benefit is similar to taking a blood pressure medication. And then those who have mild hypoglycemia, like pre-diabetes or early stage type 2 diabetes, if they do 10 hours time restricted eating, then they see much better glucose control. It's almost like taking a low dose metformin. What we're finding is when people do 10 hours, particularly people who have pre-existing conditions, because they are the ones who are going to see the best health benefit, they can sustain this 10 hours time restricted eating for up to a year. At least two-thirds of our participants can sustain it for 1 year without much hand-holding after 3 months. So we think that's a good sweet spot. And once you practice it, the benefit is, suppose say you do it for 3 months and then you fall off the wagon. So then that doesn't mean that you cannot go back because you can always go back. And you know that this is one item in your health menu that you can always practice.
The sweet spot for an eating window is 10 hours. This will lower blood pressure, reverse type 2 diabetes, and it's easy to sustain. Dr. Panda with Dr. Scher, the DietDoctor.com. Most of us, when fasting, push it to an extreme. We may reduce calorie or protein intake. In all of our mice studies, says Dr. Panda, we make sure that both groups get the same nutrients, the same calories. We are not reducing calories, not reducing protein. In humans, when fasting, they will often reduce their food intake. There are other well-controlled studies of resistance training athletes. They do time-restricted eating. their muscle mass remains constant and their fat mass reduces. These athletes are very mindful of their nutrient intake. When they're doing their time-restricted eating, they do not change their nutrition quality. Yet they still have reduced fat mass and they preserve their muscle mass. Many people feel that fasting is a painful experience, so they will reduce their nutrition intake. So we created the My Circadian Clock app. Users simply self-monitor their eating for a few weeks. If the users are eating for 16 hours, for example, if they can reduce that by 4 hours, that's a great starting point. So let's say that you are now above 14 hours a day eating window. Try to get to 12 hours for a couple of weeks. Then go for 10 hours. If you can get to the 10-hour mark for 5 days, your body will train itself. At the weekend, for example, you may eat outside the 10 hours. You will feel a hangover effect. Your stomach will punish you. You'll come back to eating within 10 hours. Another example, if we start eating around 9 or 10 a.m. and our last meal is around 5 or 6 p.m., that's very doable for most people. You can still have one meal with your loved ones. If you go for an 8 or a 6-hour eating window, perhaps that will put stress on your social connections. If you can do 10 hours for 5 or 6 days a week, that's good enough. Many people reduce their high blood pressure as if they're taking medication. If they're mild hyperglycemic, prediabetes, or type 2 diabetes, they get much better glucose control as if taking metformin. If you can do this 10 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week, for those with pre-existing conditions, they will see the best health benefit. They can easily sustain this way of eating for up to a year. This is a very good sweet spot. For example, if 3 months in they fall off the wagon, they can always go back. Dr. Panda says, this is one item in your health menu you can always practice. Annotated and summarized. Easy to share with loved ones. To access these annotations, go to doctorstotrust.com or see the description below the title of this video.